It's a really fascinating question. About 40 years ago, as a young state official, I was obsessed with making better policies. And at the time, policy formation was sort of an emerging field of study, a discipline. And people used to criticise the poor policies of states, of nations, institutions. And attention turned to making better policy, more systematic analysis, more comparisons, a deeper understanding of the costs of particular policies. And policies did improve. They became more coherent, more rational, more concerned with the aspirations of individuals, of businesses. And guess what? Practice did not change, because there was no concern for having policies, for the implementation of policies. And I think we're now at a point where the study of implementation is starting to emerge as a serious discipline, because we've begun to realise that in complex systems, which is what education systems as a whole are, and universities are, they're complex institutions. One of the most complex institutions in the world is a university. You can't just say, do this. You have to say, you have to have a conversation that says, this is what we want to do. This is why we think it's important. What do you think we should do? How should we implement it? What is your role in the implementation? And you get into the studying the social dynamics of changing behaviour, which is what policy is designed to do. And so implementation is emerging as a big issue. The real challenge is that we have political systems now in most parts of the world where political leadership of institutions and of systems changes relatively quickly. And new leaders want new policies and don't necessarily want to see practitioners implementing the policies of not the last minister or the last government, but the one 3 ago, because the time to change policy is very long, and the time to change practice is even longer. So I think what's happened, if I just sort of try and summarise it, 40 years ago, better policy was the desire and the goal, and better policy making has actually been achieved. Practice, however, and the implementation of policy still has not caught up with the better policies. And so now it's a very interesting challenge for foundations such as yours to focus on, okay, how do I move from being a think tank to a do tank, which is one of your mantras, which I think is a very nice way to capture the challenge that faces educational institutions. How to take the better policies and implement them so that young people learn better, adults learn better, and societies improve.
Thank you.
I mean, in some ways, the program in Indonesia connects to what we were just talking about. Is that we know that Indonesia wants to have a more effective higher education system, which serves more people more effectively. And how are you going to do that? Okay, you can issue a policy. The Russian word, or an old word for it, is ukaz. You will do this. Oh, that's great. And what is going to happen if I don't do it? Well, in a nation of 300 million people, spread across I forget how many islands, with I think at least two time zones, no one checks. So if you're going to actually have something that is implemented, it has to be a policy that is shaped and understood by the people who are going to be responsible for the local implementation. And what the workshop that we were doing was trying to explain that policy formation should be an interactive process between the leaders of institutions, government officials, representatives of business, industry, society. And once you shape the policies in that collegial way, you also encourage the formation of communities of practice. In this case, networks of rectors and vice rectors and ministry officials who learn from each other, who help each other solve problems of implementation, who help each other design better methods of retaining students and helping them find jobs. And even institutions that are alike, same size, same disciplines, have different practices, and they can compare those practices and learn from each other and adapt to their local cultures and their local traditions and values. And if you want to, you can also begin the practice of comparing local policies and achievements with international policies and achievements. So for me, one of the most interesting exchanges was a discussion about who should Indonesia compare itself to.
Oh.
And one of the rectors said, well, I compare myself to MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And very politely, we established that Massachusetts Institute of Technology's annual tuition is 50-something thousand US, and his was not even 1,000 US dollars. So the resource environment was fundamentally different. It's great to aspire to be Massachusetts Institute of Technology. MIT is a great institution, does fabulous work, even has a good arts degree, as well as a good technology degree. But it's not achievable in a less resource-rich environment next year. By the time Indonesia reaches its 100th year of independence, 2045, maybe. And it's good to have that aspirational goal, but in the interim, it's important also to have an achievable goal for 2020. And that discussion was, for me, one of the most interesting exchanges in the environment. What we were trying to do was to encourage rectors to learn from each other, because the tradition in many societies is for the ministry to pronounce and the rectors to implement. Well, doesn't always work that way. So I think it would be great if we can repeat that exercise a few times. We want to try and encourage them to be what we call a community of practice, where people of like minds and with like purposes to make a better Indonesian higher education system, for example, to work together, to exchange ideas, to learn from each other. They don't need people like me coming and saying, look, it'd be great if you did experiential learning. It's much better that they get together and say, I found a better way to encourage student engagement, or I found a better way to use online education to supplement classroom education. It's much better they learn from each other, because they know their environments, they know their context, they know their resource constraints. Where places like the Head Foundation add value is saying, that's fabulous, here's your benchmark, here's your reference point, here's another way to think about this. In baking bread, it's adding the yeast to the flour and the water.